Right. All right. Welcome to Reading Grounds. It is July 14th, and I'm sorry that that song cuts off so abruptly. I'm not smart enough to do anything about it, so we're just gonna have to live with it. Thanks for coming on the stream, Kim Marie Shelby, coming in here early. Tyler, appreciate you listening in on all this. Um, Tonight is July 14th, 2019. Last time on the stream, we did some reading, thankfully, because that is what the stream is about. We read some short stories that were historical fiction. I read my own little short story, which wasn't nearly as good, and we also read Mrs. Tiddlywinks because, of course, we did. Um, let's uh, let's see what's on the Wikipedia front page for tonight. Today's featured article is Noronhamus vespucci. Vespucci's rodent was a rat from the islands of Fernando de Noronha off northeastern Brazil. Numerous but fragmentary fossils remain of the extinct species of uncertain but probably Holocene age. Uh, they were discovered in 1973 and described in 1999. N. vespucci was larger than the black rat, with high-crowned molars and several ridges on the skull that anchored the chewing muscles. A member of the family Cricketidae and subfamily Sigmodontinae. It shared several distinctive characters with the tribe of Oryzomyini. I feel like I'm reading like fantasy races that have the ridiculous names with like 12 Z's in them. The close relatives of the rat include some rats that were adapted to a semi-aquatic lifestyle, spending much of their time in the water, but features of Noronhamus bones suggest that it lost its semi-aquatic lifestyle after arrival at its remote island. Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci may have seen it on a visit to Fernando de Noronha in 1503. I don't know what to do with that information, but there it is. In the news recently, a skull found in Epidema cave in Greece in 1978 is dated to 215,000 years ago, making it possibly the earliest Homo sapiens known to have lived outside of Africa. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement has become operational. Iran has announced an increase in uranium enrichment beyond the limit set in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Wikipedia is a day ahead, so it speaks of the day July 15th in history, which is Marine Day in Japan. On July 15th in 1410, the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania defeated the monastic state of the Teutonic Knights in the Battle of Grunwald, the decisive engagement of the Polish-Lithuanian Teutonic War. Teutonic? I don't really know. In 1799, French soldiers uncovered the Rosetta Stone in Fort Julien near the Egyptian port city of Rashid. In 1959, 500,000 American steelworkers went on strike, closing nearly every steel mill in the country. Wow. In 1983, Armenian extremist organization Asala bombed the Turkish Airlines check-in counter at Orly Airport, killing 8 and injuring 55 as part of its campaign for the recognition and reparations of the Armenian genocide. In 2009, Caspian Airlines Flight 7908 crashed in northwestern Iran, killing all 168 people on board. There's a trivia section as well. Did you know? The new Djamma de Jazer Mosque is the tallest building in Africa. The Irish musician Gregory Gray, who started his career in a boy band, became the cult indie musician Mary Cigarettes. Okay, that's a lot of words that I don't necessarily understand. In 1974, a United States Army private first class stole a helicopter and landed it on the White House lawn. Catherine Despard helped compose the speech that her husband, the ringleader of the Despard plot, gave at the gallows. American pool player John Schmidt holds the record for the longest straight pool run at 626. I don't know if any of that information is useful to anybody, but there it is. So, like I said last time, we did a bit of school reading because I was too lazy to do it during the week. Um, this week, I did discover a short story for free on the internet. I think it was advertised to me through an ad on Instagram. I was thinking about reading it on the stream, so we'll probably be doing that tonight. Um, as I think I've mentioned before, I'm going to mention it again. I do have my own blog, which I've been writing. I've been updating it every Sunday. And today's writing was about Blue Ruin, the most excellent revenge movie that is available on Netflix. Very low budget, very good movie. Definitely worth checking out. As far as other things to read, actually, the reason I brought up my blog thinking about it is because I tend to write my blog entries a week ahead of time. Um, I do that, or well, I write them a couple weeks ahead of time. So I have 2 weeks already written out and scheduled to go out. That way, if for some reason I miss a week, then I have a bit of leeway. I don't have to worry about missing an update. Um, Today I wrote for 2 weeks ahead of time. I wrote an article about, well, not an article, a blog post about Peanuts, the newspaper comic by Charles Schulz. I think I might also read his Wikipedia article tonight because it is he was a guy that went through a lot. And the whole point of that blog post was that his suffering gave him inspiration for Peanuts and helped to make it that much different from its contemporaries. So we'll probably be reading that as well. In the meantime, I do have two two stories that I have not read that I was supposed to read for class. I didn't read them because there's no actual like grade on it. They don't like test you on it. They don't ask you about it. You're just given this and be like, hey, read this as an example. And I'm very lazy, so I just did not even bother. But we can try reading them. One of them is really, I guess, kind of dull looking, and the other is like on the opposite end of the spectrum. And I'm just talking about the website, not the actual story itself. But um, one of them is a story called Total Eclipse, kind of like that one song, Total Eclipse of the Heart. It's exactly like that. But it's basically just like it's a column instead of like an article, but it's a really long column. Like it stretches a long ways. And there's nothing else on the page. It's just the text. Um, and then the other one is on the opposite end of the artistic website spectrum. It looks like something out of Highlight, that old children's magazine. I don't even know if Highlight is still going on. Let's find out. But I remember reading a lot of those as a kid. Yeah, apparently it's still going strong. But it kind of looks like that. Um, it is interesting though because it doesn't seem like quite as well. It's not really a bad thing if something is childish, but it does like it's got a kind of a cartoony, colorful pictures on it, just to illustrate a little bit. But it doesn't look like it's a kid's story, if that makes sense. Yeah. In fact, there are some big swears in there, and I am very shy. I don't want to do that. Maybe I do. Because I mean, it's eye catching, you know. You see something, and you're like, "Hey, I want to read that. That's colorful." And I'm apparently still a child, and I blush whenever I see a swear word on a page. So I don't know if you guys have already fallen asleep or not, um, but I'm going to leave it up to you guys maybe, because I can't decide. So we can either read the Charles Schulz Wikipedia page, um, we can read that other short story, which I have not talked about at all, or we can read Total Eclipse, or we can read My Dad Tried to Kill Me with an Alligator, which is the big swears. Tyler's already voting for the big swears. Um, I don't know if Shelby and Kimmery are lucid or if they're, half asleep or drunk or some combination of the two. But if I don't get an answer in the next 5 minutes, I'm gonna, well, never mind. I was gonna make some kind of a big terrorist threat, but I don't think we need that on this show. I don't need the FBI breaking down my door. It's a nice door. While I'm waiting for any sort of answer, and I'll just reiterate those options. We have Charles Schultz, we have Total Eclipse, we have Big Swears, and then we have the other story, which I have not talked about at all. Those are your four options, Shelby and Kimmery, if you care at all. Um, so while I'm waiting for those answers, last night I watched for the first time a movie called Scanner Darkly, which is based on Philip K. Dick story, which I've talked about him on the stream because he's another guy who he had kind of a messed up life, but it really influenced his writing. That movie is a complete trip. It's great. Basically, the story is that Keanu Reeves is this undercover cop, um, and in the near future, and he's really good at what he does, kind of. But the war on drugs is so intense that like undercover cops wear these like high tech suits that conceal their identities even from themselves. Like when they only wear them when they're in a precinct, so that they can talk to other cops without other undercover cops without revealing their identities. And so he's an undercover cop. He's surveilling this house. He's also like this drug lord at the same time that's manufacturing this big drug that's basically destroying society. He's not manufacturing it, but he's like a big deal, like a big fish. So he's a narc and he's a big fish target. And so it's we kind of talked about how Philip K. Dick wrote a lot about identity. He wrote Blade Runner, which is all about like, deciding or trying to decide what it means to be human. Um, and the Scanner Darkly is like that, where he doesn't quite know because he gets confused. He's like watching himself, on the monitor and seeing himself as this drug lord, but he's also a cop at the same time. So like there's this whole dichotomy, and it's a really good movie. It's available on Amazon Prime if you have that. It's an animated movie, but it's like rotoscoped, so it doesn't look like like a Disney thing. It looks like this fever dream, like this really bad hallucination you would have, and it makes it great. Like if it hadn't been for that, it would have been kind of an okay movie, but the visuals really add to it. They help you get into his shoes and trip out a little bit. So, anyways, that's my movie recommendation for the week. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It looks like we're doing the big swears because Shelby, like 20 minutes ago, told me that she and Kimmery want the big swears. And 25 minutes ago, Tyler said he wanted the big swears. So we're going to do that. I'm going to include a link in the description if you want to see what I'm talking about. Because this looks like Highlight, the children's magazine. Ah! Computer. Right, and this is a story. It's apparently nonfiction. Um, because what we were trying to do, uh, the assignment that it was for in class was to write a nonfiction story. Um, but anyways, I can get more into that nonfiction story because it pertains to a little bit to Charles Schulz and Peanuts and all that. So if we get around to talking about that tonight, I'll talk about that nonfiction story I wrote. Um, in the meantime, let's see if I can get a capture. Oh, for Pete's sake, this is what I wanted last time. I think. Maybe? Maybe not. Maybe it's not working. I'm trying to get it so that so that you can see it. Oh, I guess that's not gonna work. That's weird. Okay, we'll just do it the old school way. So if you can see it on the stream now, this is what that article that I'm talking about looks like. It's very colorful. It's very strange. And we'll figure this all out. I'm gonna see if I can create a highlight, like I was meaning to. My Dad Tried to Kill Me with an Alligator by Harrison Scott Key. Posted on May 12th, 2015. The Pearl River is full of trash, Volkswagen-sized catfish, and a heck of a lot of gators. Swimming in it? That was Pop's idea. In the summer of 1987, my father tried to murder me with an alligator. He was always doing fun stuff like that to see if we would die. Sometimes he tried to murder us with other things, like gasoline, when we'd say to our pop, "The leaves won't burn." In rural Mississippi, my brother and I were always burning things like leaves and garbage and carcasses, and sometimes he told us to put gas on the fire because he believed fire could teach boys about life. Sometimes he tried to murder us with recreational watercraft. This happened on our way to fish in the Pearl River, where he enjoyed piloting our venture bass boats at speeds typically reserved for cosmonaut training. He'd cut perpendicular across the wake, launching skyward, the bow of our glittering boat pitched so high that it obscured the rising sun. and we'd slam back down on the water so hard it felt like we'd landed on the interstate. To this day, I cannot injure my coccyx without thinking fondly of the man. As a boy, my interests largely concerned the life of the mind, writing poems, reading about the origins of the Latin Vulgate, plowing through science fiction stories about Captain Nemo and his Nautilus. The only thing I'd ever seen my father read was a booklet about how to mask your odor in the woods with bobcat urine. Sometimes it was hard to believe he was even my father. "Is it safe to go fast?" I'd ask, and after he'd try to outrun a jet ski with his boat. I didn't mind being in the boat with him. It was nice. But I did mind being out of the boat, especially when there were alligators in the water, as there were on that day in 1987. "Get in," he said. "Sir?" "In." I was 12 and my brother was 15, and it was July, and we were bored. "Hey, fat tart," my brother said. "Want to go fishing?" He'd started calling me Fat Tart because he thought I was fat, which I was, owing to a glandular disorder that made me eat Pop-Tarts until I stopped feeling sad. My brother was tall and blond, so we called him Bird, as in Big Bird. It didn't seem fair, his being nicknamed for a character designed to give joy to children, while I'd been named for a food product designed to give children diabetes. "Fishing?" I said. "Just you and me?" Bird possessed the two key components to being a true adolescent badass: a driver's license and a mullet. He'd also been shot in the eye with a pellet rifle, which split his pupil in half and made him squint, which made him look like a pirate. It might be dangerous going to the river with the Bird, but it also felt like a badass thing to do. "Okay," I said. Pops wanted to say no, you could tell. It's written somewhere in boating safety manuals that you don't let people named Bird and Fat Tart borrow your bass boat, even if they are your own sons. But some part of him must have been proud, seeing his boys ask permission to do something that could get them killed. Pop agreed to let us go and gave us a stern warning that if anything happened to his boat, he would have our rectums surgically removed and turned into hats. Mom warned us too. "Watch out for those giant catfish," she said. We'd all heard about the giant blue cats in the Pearl River, the ones who'd swallow scuba divers whole, although nobody ever could produce the name of the divers, or why anyone would choose to recreationally dive in a river not generally known to contain either coral reefs or visibility. Besides, there were realer things in that water, like massive knots of water moccasins, snapping turtles the size of laundry baskets, and gar, a prehistoric fish with the face of a pterodactyl and the teeth of Gary Busey. Also present, alligator Mississippiensis. They were everywhere, lying on the sandbars, slinging out of mud holes, heads pushing up through fields of lily pads. Sometimes they'd bite your lure if the crankbait was fat enough. It was a powerful thing to find yourself fighting the heft of a 600-pound, 37-million-year-old brute. "I bet a gator would like to eat you, Fat Tart," Bird said. He stuck a finger into my fatness and made a farting sound, as though to suggest I was full of strawberry filling. "You think we'll see one?" I said. I ain't scared of gators," Bird said. "Shit, gators ought to be scared of me." The Pearl River is a lovely old thing, slow and coppery and traced in fine sandy bars for 500 miles on its way to the Gulf. Off the main channel, it's home to wild peacocks and black bears and other things with mouths. Bird and I fished in the mid-morning haze, and I watched the water with interest, trying to pretend like I was not looking madly for the thing I knew was down there. "Let's swim," Bird said. "No thanks." "You scared?" "No, it's just that I don't want to die." It's an interesting sensation, knowing there's something underneath you that could eat you, and all you have to do is fall in, and there it would be, this creature, terrible enough to be in the book of Job, a thing that cannot be drawn out with a mere fishhook. "There," Bird said. I turned and saw it, the flat, wide, serrated head, scrutining us. We waited, frozen in the sodden heat, our poles dangling, the lines growing slack, knotting up in the deep. We watched the black eyes of this biblical monster. When it looked at us, what did it see? Did it wish for some animal fellowship, some longing in its bones since the time of Eden? Had some metaphysical vibration drawn it to the surface to seek spiritual intercourse with these two brothers, so very near, this Abel and this Cain, all ages and epochs of earth, collapsing into just a few feet of water and air? Had I read too many books, tried to build too much meaning into every moment? Was this merely a large amphibious predator who wished to eat us, or was it a metaphor drawing me towards something deeper, some truth that lay hidden under the black water? "Let's catch it," Bird said. "Catch it?" "I got my pistol," he said. "A 22 is all it takes." Bird wished to carry home the fiend, I think, and present it to our father as evidence of our being men and also insane. He cast his spinnerbait at its head. Please stop, I said. I bet I'll bet you could ride one. You're making it mad. Good. Bird cast and cast again, trying to convince the animal to bite, to come closer, the line zipping out, the lure plopping near its teeth. And then the beast descended and was gone. I turned my head to see where it would come up for air, and in all my twisting, a terrible thing happened. I knocked out one of the rods. Get it, Bird said. I lurched, threw myself across the gunwale, reaching out across the black. The boat dipped, rocked. If I leaned more, we would capsize. In seconds, the rod would be gone. I'm trying! Get it! I'm trying! The rod bobbed there just below the surface, its last bubbles escaping. Then vanished. We sat there for a long time. That's a $200 rod. $200 sounded like a lot, like drug dealer money. It was an Abu Garcia, a birthday present from Pop, a heavy and beautiful rod built to last forever. What do we do? I said. The fuck you think we do, fat tart? Go get it. We stared at the water some more. Go, he said. I was waiting on you to go. I ain't going. If an alligator attacked Bird, I believe he might actually have the ability to punch it in the head and get away, while my own defensive tactic was to go limp, as a courtesy to whatever might be trying to eat me. Fuck it, Bird said. Yeah, fuck it, I said, trying to sound badass. We'd reached the outer edges of our courage and found it wanting. Late that afternoon, we told Pop, and he did something even more upsetting than turning our asses into hats. Hitch up the boat, he said. We're going back. Pop drove like a man possessed. He'd thrown a few strange items into that boat, but we couldn't see what. Did he really think we could find the rod? I sort of pitied him, or maybe what I felt was embarrassment, that this is the man who made me, this loud and reckless and ignorant man who did not read books. Maybe it's obvious to suggest that there comes a time in a child's life when he stops believing that his father is Superman and sees that he is just a man with his own nameless spiritual diseases. For me, I think this was that time. When we arrived, what I saw in the boat disturbed me. There he placed a large old stop sign we'd found years before by the side of the road and an assortment of industrial strength hooks large enough to snag a leviathan. We got the boat into the water. Take me to where you was, he said. What was he going to do with the stop sign? Hit somebody with it? Threaten the alligator with traffic laws? Finally, we came to the quarter of our shame. The shadows were stark now, moving, darkening. It would soon be night. Everything was blue, the hour of day when bugs dance, when fishes jump, when alligators feed. All right, Pop said. Get in. Sir? I said. Bird jumped in and went to the bottom, over and over, my big brother, already more of a man than I could ever be. God love him. He wouldn't read a book, but he beat the hell out of somebody who did, if you asked him nicely. From where we were anchored, I could see at least 3 alligator slides, empty. The depth finder said 12 feet. I can't, I said. I took off my shoes slowly, giving Bird plenty of time to find the rod, or at the very least to be killed and eaten, which I felt would be the most loving thing to do. Go, Pop said. What if I didn't get in? Would he throw me? Would he know true things about me? That I was still a child? I jumped in. Immediately, I formulated a plan, which involved surrounding myself with a protective cloud of urine. At the bottom, what I touched with my hands and feet were skeletons and teeth and the hides of dinosaurs, or what felt like dinosaurs. Was he proving a point? Was the rod more important than our safety, our lives, our very bones? Keep looking, he said. I had been wrongly told that the safest place one could be when confronted by an alligator was underwater, as they could not bite you underwater. But wouldn't it be better to be somewhere even safer, like South Dakota? Bird was already out, taking a break. Suddenly a splash, echoing off the cypress walls of the swamp. I grabbed the lip of the boat and tried to pull myself out. I didn't say you were done, Pop said. I turned and there it was, the head of the beast. Alligator, I said. Where? Pop said. Help me out! Help! I struggled, but my fat little Twinkie arms couldn't get me out of the water. Bird reached down and pulled me out. I turned and the head was gone. You're a liar, Bird said. No, I said. There was something. It was then my father picked up the octagonal shield and fixed the enormous hooks to the bare steel post at intervals. At the very center, he tied a fat nylon rope and, without saying a word, lifted it up to the gunwale. He had made a dredge. It was a frightening device, as gruesome as it was ridiculous, a tool to find and punish heretics, non-believers. He dropped it into the water, letting it go to the bottom. Bird smirked. Look at the old man, the fool. We had failed, and he would too, and we would go home empty-handed, believing in one another just a little less. We sat there, all three of us steeping in our various disgraces, and we heard another great rumbling in the water. There she is, Pop said. I looked up, and there, rising from the black, we saw it, the rod clinging to Pop's dredge. When Pop died last year, we buried him beside a river near where I now live in Savannah, Georgia. I have no sons, only daughters. Their lives are not filled with danger, but with candy and glitter. Sure, I allow them to climb trees when their mother isn't looking, but never with bucksaws, and I never take them hunting, because there are more affordable ways to bore your children. In those days after the funeral, when the evening sun fell down and the world turned blue, I found myself growing tight in the throat and wanting to put my daughters in a boat. Hey girls, I said, you want to go to a secret island? I was talking about little Tybee, which is not a secret, but was to them. I told them of the bobcats and diamondbacks and aggressive sea snails that lived on the island. For real? They said. We put the long kayak into the Atlantic on a hot July morning, and we made our way to the island that I am sure had grown mythic and storied in their imaginations, a wide piney thing across a mile of water. Could we die? One of them asked, as the narrow yellow boat rocked a little. Yes, I said. We could get swept out to sea, or drown, or be attacked. By what? Sea snails, I said. I want them to know that safety should not be the defining virtue of their lives, while they want me to know that being alive should be the defining virtue of their lives. I closed my eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to be scared in that swamp 1,000 years ago. Had I truly believed the thing that I saw in the water was a head, attached to a body, attached to a tail that, as the Lord said to Job, can make the deep boil? Would my father really have asked me to go near such a thing? Of course not. Maybe. We buried Pop not far from here, and it would have been possible to turn the boat up into the channel and paddle all the way to his grave, although through a few cuts in the marsh. It might have taken all day, and we had so little water and no food. But what an adventure to arm our way through tidewater toward the man's body, to do a foolish thing in honor of the man who taught his children to love foolish things. A love that has led me to the waters off Key West, and the gorges of the Gila Wilderness, and the glacial waters of the Wind River Range. Places I never would have gone without a father to make me get out of the boat that day, in the genesis of my manhood. I am frightened of almost nothing now, except my brother's mullet, which still haunts me. Shark! The 6-year-old screamed. Is that really a shark? The 8-year-old said. Could be a dolphin, I said. Let's see. We waited, but no happy, child-friendly aquatic animal breached before us. Just a fin. A single, purposefully, somewhat overly serious, perhaps ectothermic, possibly murderous dorsal fin, arrowing across the lambent ripples of midday while my children gripped the sides of the boat and asked me questions about the shark that I could not possibly know. What kind was it? How big was it? Did it want to eat them? Which one of them did it want to eat? What could we do as to not to be eaten by it? Could I kill it? Could they stay in the boat while I killed it? Can we pedal faster towards the beach? Is there a motor on this kayak? If so, can we use it to kill the shark? Why aren't you paddling? Get your knife, Dad, one of them said. If one of you gets eaten, we will name the boat after you, I said. The 8-year-old turned and gave me a look that said, Is my father an idiot for bringing us out here? Of course not. Maybe. In the 30 years since the day I asked the same question, I know so much less than I ever thought I would. Every true thing has been stripped away by time and loss, but there's a thing I think I know, and it's this. Fathers, when they are doing it right, often look like fools. Shark! The younger one said, the fin having reappeared only 20 yards away. Would my children still tell stories about this moment long from now? Would they tell themselves it was a shark when we don't know? Would they make up stories about what they cannot see, what's under the water, under the earth, buried, gone? Pedal, they said, trying their hardest to get to land. Girls, girls, I said, let's see if we can get closer. No, they said, I won't let it hurt you. They stopped and thought, frozen. I turned our boat. We paddled toward the monster in the water. Okay. So that's my dad tried to kill me with an alligator. It was a more interesting story than I was anticipating, actually. Oh, let me, this thing. Let me do that before, I reveal all my deep, dark secrets. Yeah, I like the story. What'd you guys think? It's I think it's pretty good, pretty well written. Tyler's saying no for me, boss. Does that mean you didn't like it, Tyler? Tyler did not like it. That's a shame. I liked it. I thought it was well written. In fact, I have to admit, I get kind of jealous whenever I see good writing because I'm like, dang it, I don't know if I could write something like that. And I get that a lot with the Song of Ice and Fire. Where I'm like, dang it, I don't think I could ever write fantasy this good. And reading this guy, I was kind of like that. I was like, dang it, I don't have any like life experiences that sound like they're straight out of a book. It's well written. Plus the fact that he's been like reading and writing since he was a little kid. I mean, I did a fair bit of reading as a kid, but ugh, writing is more of a new thing. So I get kind of jealous at the idea of somebody having written for longer than I have. Well, ladies, I don't know if you're asleep over there, but if you want to tell me what you thought about it, feel free to. All right. I'm going to try and pull up the next thing. I'm thinking normally I don't know what's up with the chat. It seems to be like the chat doesn't update automatically until I don't know. Because Shelby told me her opinion, and then I didn't see it until literally just now, even though it got posted like 2 minutes ago. I don't know what's up with the chat. YouTube is jank, but anyways, I liked it. Shelby Shelby wasn't paying attention, of course. Kimry doesn't know what to think, but I liked it. All right. So normally I take a break after about an hour. Rather than start one of the other long reads, um, I'm going to try one of the shorter reads, which should be the Charles Schulz Wikipedia page. We'll be doing that real quick. Here's an interesting fact about Chrome that I just learned tonight. You can pull out a tab from your row of tabs, have that be its own window, and then you can put that one window in full screen, and then not the rest of Google Chrome, if that makes sense. I'll do a screen capture real quick so I can show it off. So you can see up here I've got all my tabs. This one, yeah, that's that short story I was talking about. I don't know anything about it. You can see all my tabs, but I also have this one here. I press F11 to go full screen. This one is in full screen. The rest of the tabs are not. I don't know if that's useful, but it is useful to me because I can full screen this without worrying about the other stuff. But anyways, we did read the Wikipedia article for Philip K. Dick probably a couple months ago now, maybe a month or two. I don't remember. This one is considerably shorter, but it is interesting. I don't know if I will read my blog entry on Charles Schulz right now. Um, but if you're at all curious about that, that should be coming out in like 2 weeks. I'll probably forget by the time that happens. I guess, well, to be fair, the blog post that I have is more about peanuts rather than uh, Charles Schulz, but that's okay. We're going to read this real quick and then go to break. Charles Monroe Sparky Schulz was born November 26, 1922, and died February 12, 2000. He was an American cartoonist and creator of the comic strip Peanuts, which featured the characters Charlie Brown and Snoopy, among others. He is widely regarded as one of the most influential cartoonists of all time, cited by cartoonists such as Jim Davis, Bill Watterson, Matt Groening, and Stephan Pastis. Born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Schulz grew up in St. Paul. He was the only child of Carl Schulz, who was born in Germany, and Dana Halverson, who had Norwegian heritage. His uncle called him Sparky after the horse Sparkplug in Billy DeBeck's comic strip Barney Google. Schulz loved drawing and sometimes drew his family dog, Spike, who ate unusual things such as pins and tacks. In 1937, Schulz drew a picture of Spike and sent it to Ripley's Believe It or Not. His drawing appeared in Robert Ripley's syndicated panel captioned, "A hunting dog that eats pins, tacks, and razor blades is owned by C.F. Schulz, St. Paul, Minnesota." Drawn by Sparky. C.F. was his father, Carl Fred Schulz. Schulz attended the Richards Gordon Elementary School in St. Paul, where he skipped 2 half grades. He became a shy, timid teenager, perhaps as a result of being the youngest in his class at Central High School. One well-known episode in his high school life was the rejection of his drawings by his high school yearbook, which he referred to in Peanuts years later. When he had Lucy ask Charlie Brown to sign a picture he drew of a horse, only to then say it was a prank. 5-foot-tall statue of Snoopy was placed in the school's main office 60 years later. In February 1943, Schulz's mother Dena died after a long illness. At the time of her death, he had only been recently made aware that she suffered from cancer. Schulz had by all accounts been very close to his mother, and her death had a big effect on him. Around the same time, Schulz was drafted into the United States Army. He served as a staff sergeant with the 20th Armored Division in Europe during World War II, as a squad leader on a 50 cal machine gun team. He saw combat only at the very end of the war. Schulz said he had one opportunity to fire his machine gun, but forgot to load it. He said that the German soldier he could have fired at willingly surrendered. Years later, Schulz proudly spoke of his wartime service. In late 1945, Schulz returned to Minneapolis. He did lettering for a Roman Catholic comic magazine, and then took a job at Art Instruction Inc., reviewing and grading lessons submitted by students. He worked at the school for several years while developing his career as a comic creator until he was making enough money to do that full time. Schulz's first group of regular cartoons, a weekly series of one-panel jokes called Little Folks, was published from June 1947 to January 1950 in the St. Paul Pioneer Press, with Schulz usually doing 4 one-panel drawings per issue. It was in Little Folks that Schulz first used the name Charlie Brown for a character, although he applied the name in 4 gags to 3 different boys, as well as one buried in sand. The series also had a dog that looked much like Snoopy. In May 1948, Schulz sold his first one-panel drawing to the Saturday Evening Post. Within the next 2 years, a total of 17 untitled drawings by Schulz were published in the Post, simultaneously with his work for the Pioneer Press. Around the same time, he tried to have Little Folk syndicated through the Newspaper Enterprise Association. Schulz would have been an independent contractor for the syndicate, unheard of in the 1940s, but the deal fell through. Little Folks was dropped from the Pioneer Press in 1950. Oh, jeez. In 1948, Schulz tried to have Little Folk syndicated through Newspaper Enterprise Association, a firm run by the Scripps Howard newspaper chain. Schulz would have been, right, already said that. Little Folks was dropped in early 1950. Later that year, Schulz approached the United Features Syndicate, also operated by Scripps Howard, with his best work from Little Folks. When his work was picked up by them, they decided to run the new comic strip he had been working on. The strip was similar in spirit to the panel comic, but had a set cast of characters rather than different names for Little Folks for each page. The name Little Folks was very close to the names of two other comics at the time, Al Cap's Little Abner and a strip titled Little Folks. So to avoid confusion, the syndicate settled on the name Peanuts after the peanut gallery featured in the Howdy Doody show. The title Peanuts was chosen by the syndication editor. In a 1987 interview, Schulz said, "It's totally ridiculous, has no meaning, is simply confusing, and has no dignity. And I think my humor has dignity." At its height, Peanuts was published daily in 2,600 newspapers in 75 countries in 21 languages. Over the nearly 50 years that Peanuts was published, Schulz drew nearly 18,000 strips. The strips, plus merchandise and product endorsements, produced revenues of more than $1 billion per year. Keep in mind, this is, 50 years ago, with Schulz earning an estimated $30 million to $40 million annually. During the strip's run, Schulz took only one vacation, a 5-week break in late 1997 to celebrate his 75th birthday. Reruns of the strip ran during his vacation, the only time that occurred during Schulz's life. The first collection of Peanut strips was published in July 1952 by Reinhardt and Company. Many more books followed, greatly contributing to the strip's increasing popularity. In 2004, Fantagraphs began their complete Peanuts series. Charlie Brown, the principal character of Peanuts, was named after a co-worker at Art Institution, Inc. Schulz drew much from his own life, some examples being, like Charlie Brown's parents, Schulz's father was a barber and his mother a housewife. Like Charlie Brown, Schulz had often felt shy and withdrawn. In an interview with Charlie Rose in May 1997, Schulz observed, "I suppose there's a melancholy feeling in a lot of cartoonists, because cartooning, like all other humor, comes from bad things happening." Schulz reportedly had an intelligent dog when he was a boy. Although this dog was a pointer, not a beagle like Snoopy, family photos confirm a certain physical resemblance. Schulz's inspiration for Charlie Brown's unrequited love for the little red-haired girl was Donna Mae Johnson, an art instruction Inc. accountant with whom he fell in love with. They dated for 3 years, but when Schulz finally proposed to her in June 1950, shortly after he made his first contract with the syndicate, she turned him down and married another man. Despite that, they remained good friends for the duration of their lives. In 1951, Schulz married Joyce Halverson, and Schulz adopted Halverson's daughter Meredith. Later that same year, they adopted to Colorado Springs, Colorado. Their son, Monty, was born in February 1952, and 3 more children were born later in Minnesota. Schulz and his family returned to Minneapolis and stayed until 1958. Schulz's father died while visiting him in 1966, the same year Schulz's Sebastopol studio burned down. By 1969, Schulz had moved to Santa Rosa, California, where he lived and worked until his death. By Thanksgiving 1970, it was clear that Schulz's marriage was in trouble. He was having an affair with a 25-year-old woman named Tracy Claudius. The Schultzes divorced in 1972, and in September 1973, he married Jean Forsyth Clyde, whom he had met when she brought her daughter to his hockey rink. They were married for 27 years until his death in 2000. On Sunday, May 8, 1988, two gunmen in ski masks entered the Schultz's house through an unlocked door, planning to kidnap Jean, but the attempt failed when their daughter, Jill, drove up to the house, prompting the would-be kidnappers to flee. Jill called the police from a neighbor's house. Sonoma County Sheriff Dick Michelson said it was obviously an attempted kidnap ransom. This was a targeted criminal act. They knew exactly who the victims were. In the 1980s, Schulz complained that sometimes his hand was shaking so much that he had to hold his wrist to draw. This led to an erroneous impression that Schulz had Parkinson's disease. According to a letter from his physician placed at the archives of the Charles M. Schulz Museum by his widow, Schulz had an essential tremor, a condition alleviated by beta blockers. An essential tremor is a progressive neurological disorder that is that has an unknown cause. Schulz still insisted on writing and drawing the strip by himself, resulting in noticeably shakier lines over time. In November 1999, Schulz suffered several strokes and had a blocked aorta, and was later found to have colon cancer that had metastasized. Because of the chemotherapy and the fact that he could not see clearly, he announced his retirement on December 14, 1999. This was difficult for Schulz, who told Al Roker on the Today Show, "I have never dreamed that this would happen to me. I always had the feeling that I would probably stay with the strip until I was in my early 80s, but all of a sudden it's gone. It's been taken away from me. I did not take this away from me." Schulz was asked if, in his final Peanuts strip, Charlie Brown would finally get to kick the football after so many decades of attempting to kick it. His response was, "Oh no, definitely not. I could not have Charlie Brown kick that football. That would be a terrible disservice to him after nearly half a century." But in a December 1999 interview, holding back tears, Schulz recounted the moment when he signed the final strip, saying, "All of a sudden I thought, that poor kid, he never even got to kick the football. What a dirty trick. He never had a chance to kick the football." Schulz died at his home on February 12, 2000, at the age of 77 of colon cancer. The last original Peanuts strip was published the next day, Sunday, February 13th. Schulz had predicted that the strip would outlive him because the strips were usually drawn weeks before their publication. Schulz was buried at Pleasant Hill Cemetery in Sebastopol, California. As part of his contract with the syndicate, Schulz requested that no other artist be allowed to draw Peanuts. United Features had legal ownerships of the strips, but honored his wishes, instead syndicating reruns to newspapers. New television specials had been produced since Schulz's death, with the stories based on previous strips. Anyways, I guess that Wikipedia article isn't nearly as dramatic as I thought it was, but yeah, the dude went through a lot, being close to his mom, finding out that she died like that, uh, getting into the military the same year. What can you do, though? Anyways, I'm gonna take a break and probably come back. Don't be surprised if I don't, but I'll probably be back. Anyways, so I'll be back, maybe. Maybe. I like that song, but that abrupt ending drives me nuts. I don't know if I'd mind so much if the song was a little longer, but it's only, just shy of 3 minutes. Anyways, welcome back, I guess. I don't know where you were, but I was right here. I didn't actually leave my room. I just wandered around for a little bit. All right. So lately I've been reading a book by a local author called Jane Doe 17, which is, kind of a cool name. I've been trying to finish it. I've been making a point to do some reading before I start my shift. My shift starts at 5 o'clock every single day, without exception, because they're very strict about when you get paid and or like the hours you spend and all that. But I was late twice my first week, and thankfully they were pretty cool about it. They were pretty understanding, but I felt really bad. So to compensate for it, I determined that I would um, show up a little early to make sure that I'm not late. And a lot of people end up late. It's not that big of a deal, especially if it's not something you can help. But, anyways, I've made a point to leave an hour before my shift starts. So I usually get there a half hour. I usually get there a half hour before I need to clock in. And I've been making a point to read during that time so that I can get some reading done because I don't do a lot of reading, even though I should. But this book, Jane Doe 17, by a local author, it's kind of a weird story. Basically, this woman gets hit by a car, and she ends up in a coma, and they don't know who she is. She's Jane Doe 17. But the thing is that she escaped from like this serial killer who was trying to kill her, as opposed to trying to do anything else. So she has these. She was just found in her underwear, and she has these big, long gashes in her uh, arms and legs, because that's serial killer. Um, but like the weird thing is that like the people that found her are having like visions. Um, one of the ladies that found her keeps imagining that someone is following her, and then she keeps having these dreams where she's one of the victims being tortured, and it's like really vivid. And then the guy that accidentally hit her, he's having dreams where he's the serial killer, where he's the one that's cutting people open and all this stuff. So kind of a trip. Hopefully it ends up being good. I gotta admit that the writing kind of I just straight up skip some of it, but it's kind of this weird combination where like I don't want to stop reading it because it's just interesting enough, even though it's not the best writing there is. Anyways, I don't know what any of you have been reading, if anything at all, or if you've been listening to audiobooks or anything like that. If you have been doing any of those things, feel free to post about them in the chat. That way I can make fun of you for your life choices. I'm just kidding. I won't do that. Not to your face. But now, as I said, I have two more short stories here. I have the one that the website that it's on looks really boring. It's part of the school assignment, and then I have the other one I haven't really talked about. It's a short story called Weakness. Um, there's a bit of a preface to it because I got an advertisement for this. I don't know. I think it was an advertisement. I think it was on Instagram. My memory is such though that thinking about it, maybe it was just like a tweet that I happened to see, and it caught my attention. Um, because it's not just a short story, but there's also a reading of it. And I'm not gonna play someone else's reading on my reading stream. That kind of defeats the point. This isn't a radio show. Um, but I'll read a bit of the preface because I don't know anything about this story except the little paragraph that precedes it. It says, "Not too long ago, I won an honorable mention from the Writers of the Future short story contest for my short story Weakness. As a thank you for visiting my tiny corner of the internet," it's from their website, "I reached out to a professional voice actor, George Castrinos, and asked him to narrate the tale. He agreed, and his narration is out of this world fantastic. I thought it was a good story to begin with, naturally, but his performance adds that little bit of magic, that extra bit of magic." That's the only thing I know about it. It's a story, like I said, Weakness by Shami Stovall. Um, okay, I'm just now seeing the chat update from 15 minutes ago. Shelby was asking why we read Wikipedia stuff. We don't read it, I read it. And I read Wikipedia stuff because that's free. It's public domain. And I don't want to, like, well, and it's short form, so it's easy to use here. Tyler mentions it's a good thing Charles Schulz wasn't a raging racist. Yeah, that was that was something I think I remember reading about. Um, that he was like he was pretty, maybe not like super progressive, not like I'm gonna have a black guy dating a white woman in my book here in the 1960s, but he was still like really progressive even for his time. I think I remember hearing some about that. I was gonna say that I think I remember because there was like one kid in the comic that was black, and I think that was kind of a big deal seeing white kids and black kids interact with each other, especially because the kid wasn't a walking stereotype. He was pretty normal. And I was thinking, I think there's like one of those television specials that Peanuts is known for. Um, I think there was one like on Thanksgiving or something, and there's like this screenshot of that floating around with like all the white kids are sitting on one half of the table and the black kid is sitting alone on the opposite side. And then, like the joke is supposed to be, oh haha, it's like racist. And then I remember hearing that like it's actually like there's a like an actual reason for it. I was gonna bring that up, but I don't know the context for it, so I was like, I better not mention that because that'd make me sound stupid. But anyways, so um, we do have Tyler saying he's reading more 30K. I love 30,000. Um, like I said, we do have Total Eclipse, which is the other school assignment. We also have this other short story, which got an honorable mention, and because it's just out there, I'm assuming it's public domain. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Looking at the guy's website, woman's website. Oh, she's from Utah. How about that? Okay. Maybe that's how it ended up here. Um, but there's three things here. It says author, gamer, and JD. Uh, huh. I don't know what a JD is. But anyways, I think I okay, that's here's something that's worth mentioning. So, Pocket, when you look at writing, it will estimate how long it takes to write based on the number of words, or how long it takes to read based on the number of words. The honorable mention short story Weakness, it says here estimated 28 minutes, but the recording that it provides from the professional voice actor is 43 minutes. On the other hand, I don't have an estimation for Total Eclipse, but it does look longer. Maybe I'm wrong. I think I am wrong. But I'm gonna ask, I don't know, do you guys prefer Total Eclipse or do you prefer Weakness? And if you want to go ahead and vote, hopefully I'll see your answers within the next 20 years. I don't know what's going on with this with the chat. I don't know why YouTube is jank. But feel free to give me your opinion so I can laugh at you. Ready, go. Tyler is saying he wants a total eclipse of the heart. And I'm surprised that I saw that message immediately. I guess it was like a minute ago, whatever. I guess while I'm waiting to see if Shelby and Kimmery have an answer. So Writers of the Future. Okay. Apparently, I think JD from that writer, I think it means Juris Doctor. Because that's what makes sense. It's like a law degree. Anyways, um, it may be worth noting it got an honorable mention from Writers of the Future, like I've mentioned a couple times. That is a Scientology group, an L. Ron Hubbard sponsored thing. They had a huge booth at Comic Con, and they told me a little bit about Writers of the Future. And I was honestly really curious, but I don't want to give Scientology my information, uh, which is sad. Like you don't want to like have you don't want to have that relationship. You don't want to think of any organization as being like Scientology, but you do. And also, my short stories don't exactly have a good track record. So I don't know if the chat is just taking forever to catch up, or if the ladies have fallen asleep on us, or, if they're just tired of me perpetually insulting them, and me sitting here wondering why I can't get a date. I think I'm just going to go with Eclipse. That's what Tyler wants. And Tyler did, Tyler. He's Tyler. And we're going to read for Tyler. I'll do the same display capture that I did before. Boom. But I got to warn you that it's a lot more boring to look at than the other one. Total Eclipse by Annie Dillard. From Teaching a Stone to Talk. It had been like dying, that sliding down the mountain pass. It had been like the death of someone. Irrational. That sliding down the mountain pass and into the region of dread. It was like slipping into fever or falling down that hole in sleep from which you wake yourself whimpering. We had crossed the mountains that day, and now we were in a strange place, a hotel in central Washington, in a town near Yakima. The eclipse we had traveled here to see would occur early in the next morning. I lay in bed. My husband, Gary, was reading beside me. I lay in bed and looked at the painting on the hotel room wall. It was a print of a detailed and lifelike painting of a smiling clown's head made out of vegetables. It was a painting of the sort which you do not intend to look at, and alas, you never forget. Some tasteless fate presses it upon you. It becomes part of the complex interior junk you carry with you wherever you go. 2 years have passed since the total eclipse of which I write. During those years I have forgotten, I assume, a great many things I wanted to remember. But I have not forgotten that clown painting or its lunatic setting in the old hotel. The clown was bald. Actually, he wore a clown's tight rubber wig, painted white. This stretched over the top of his skull, which was a cabbage. His hair was bunches of baby carrots, inset in his white clown makeup, and in his cabbage skull were small and laughing human eyes. The clown's glance was like the glance of Rembrandt in some of the self-portraits, lively, knowing, deep, and loving. The crinkled shadows around his eyes were string beans. His eyebrows were parsley. Each of his ears was a broad bean. His thin, joyful lips were red chili peppers. Between his lips were wet rows of human teeth and the suggestion of a real tongue. The clown print was framed in gilt and glassed. To put ourselves in the path of the total eclipse, that day we had driven 5 hours inland from the Washington coast, where we lived. When we tried to cross the Cascades Range, an avalanche had blocked the pass. A slope's worth of snow blocked the road. Traffic backed up. Had the avalanche buried any cars that morning? We could not learn. This highway was the only winter road over the mountains. We waited as highway crews bulldozed a passage to the avalanche. With 2x4s and walls of plywood, they erected a one-way roof tunnel through the avalanche. We drove through the avalanche tunnel, crossed the pass, and descended several thousand feet to central Washington and the broad Yakima Valley, about which we knew only that it was an orchard country. As we lost altitude, the snows disappeared. Our ears popped, the trees changed, and in the trees were strange birds. I watched the landscape innocently, like a fool, like a diver in the rapture of the deep, who plays on the bottom while his air runs out. The hotel lobby was a dark, derelict room, narrow as a corridor, and seemingly without air. We waited on a couch while the manager vanished upstairs to do something unknown to our room. Beside us, on an overstuffed chair, absolutely motionless, was a platinum blonde woman in her 40s, wearing a black silk dress and a strand of pearls. Her long legs were crossed. She supported her head on her fists. At the dim far end of the room, their backs toward us, sat 6 bald old men in their shirt sleeves around a loud television. 2 of them seemed to sleep. They were drunks. "Number 6!" cried the man on television. "Number 6!" On the broad lobby desk, lighted and bubbling, was a 10-gallon aquarium containing 1 large fish. The fish tilted up and down in the water. Against the long opposite wall sang a live canary in its cage. Beneath the cage, among spilled millet seeds on the carpet, were a decorated children's sand bucket and matching sand shovel. Now the alarm was set for 6. I lay awake remembering an article I had read downstairs in the lobby in an engineering magazine. The article was about gold mining. In South Africa, in India, and in South Dakota, the gold mines extend so deeply into the Earth's crust that they are hot. The rock walls burn the miners' hands. The companies have to air condition the mines. If the air conditioners break, the miners die. The elevators in the mine shafts run very slowly, down and up, so that miners' ears will not pop in their skulls. When the miners return to their surfaces, their faces are deathly pale. Early the next morning we checked out. It was February 26, 1979, a Monday morning. We would drive out of town, find a hilltop, watch the eclipse, and then drive back over the mountains and home to the coast. How familiar things are here, how adept we are, how smoothly and professionally we check out. I had forgotten the clown's smiling head and the hotel lobby as if they never had existed. Gary put the car in gear and off we went, as off we had gone to 100 other adventures. It was dawn when we found a highway out of town and drove into the unfamiliar countryside. By the glowing light, we could see a band of cirrostratus clouds in the sky. Later, the rising sun would clear these clouds before the eclipse began. We drove at random until we came to a range of unfenced hills. We pulled off the highway, bundled up, and climbed one of these hills. The hill was 500 feet high. Long winter-killed grass covered it, as high as our knees. We climbed and rested, sweating in the cold. We passed clumps of bundled people on the hillside who were setting up telescopes and fiddling with cameras. The top of the hill struck up in the middle of the sky. We tightened our scarves and looked about. East of us rose another hill like ours. Between the hills, far below, 13 was the highway which started south into the valley. This was the Yakima Valley. I had never seen it before. It is justly famous for its beauty, like every planted valley. It extended south into the horizon, a distant dream of a valley, a Shangri-La. All its hundreds of low, golden slopes bore orchards. Among the orchards were towns and roads and plowed and fallow fields. Through the valley wandered a thin, shining river. From the river extended fine, frozen irrigation ditches. Distance blurred and blued the sight, so that the whole valley looked like a thickness of sediment at the bottom of the sky. Directly behind us was more sky, and empty lowlands blued by distance, and Mount Adams. Mount Adams was an enormous snow-covered volcanic cone rising flat, like so much scenery. Now the sun was up. We could not see it, but the sky behind the band of clouds was yellow. and far down the valley, some hillside orchards lighted up. More people were parking near the highway and climbing the hills. It was the West. All of us rugged individualists were wearing knit caps and blue nylon parkas. People were climbing the nearby hills and setting up shop in clumps among the dead grasses. It looked as though we had all gathered on hilltops to pray for the world on its last day. It looked as though we had all crawled out of spaceships and were preparing to assault the valley below. It looked as though we were scattered on hilltops at dawn to sacrifice virgins, make rain, set stones stelae in a ring. There was no place out of the wind. The straw grasses banged our legs. Up in the sky where we stood, the air was lustreless yellow. To the west, the sky was blue. Now the sun cleared the clouds. We cast rough shadows on the blowing grass, freezing. We waved our arms. Near the sun, the sky was bright and colorless. There was nothing to see. It began with no ado. It was odd that such a well-advertised public event should have no starting gun, no overture, no introductory speaker. I should have known right then that I was out of my depth. Without pause or preamble, silent as orbits, a piece of the sun went away. We looked at it through welder's goggles. A piece of the sun was missing. In its place, we saw empty sky. I had seen a partial eclipse in 1970. A partial eclipse is very interesting. It bears almost no relation to a total eclipse. Seeing a partial eclipse bears the same relation to seeing a total eclipse as kissing a man does to marrying him, or as flying in an airplane does to falling out of an airplane. Although the one experience precedes the other, it in no way prepares you for it. During a partial eclipse, the sky does not darken, not even 94% of the sun is hidden. Nor does the sun, seen colorless through protective devices, seem terribly strange. We have all seen a sliver of light in the sky. We have all seen the crescent moon by day. However, during a partial eclipse, the air does indeed get cold, precisely as if someone were standing between you and the fire, and blackbirds do fly back to their roosts. I had seen a partial eclipse before, and here was another. What you see in an eclipse is entirely different from what you know. It is especially different for those of us whose grasp of astronomy is so frail that, given a flashlight, a grapefruit, 2 oranges, and 15 years, we still could not figure out which way to set the clocks for daylight saving time. Usually it is a bit of a trick to keep your knowledge from blinding you, but during an eclipse it is easy. What you see is more convincing than any wide-eyed theory you may know. You may read that the moon has something to do with eclipses. I have never seen the moon yet. You do not see the moon. So near the sun, it is as completely invisible as the stars are by day. What you see before your eyes is the sun going through phases. It gets narrower and narrower, as the waning moon does, and, like the ordinary moon, it travels alone in the simple sky. The sky is, of course, background. It does not appear to eat the sun. It is far behind the sun. The sun simply shaves away, gradually. You see less sun and more sky. The sky's blue was deepening, but there was no darkness. The sun was a wide crescent, like a segment of tangerine. The wind freshened and blew steadily over the hill. The eastern hill across the highway grew dusky and sharp. The towns and orchards in the valley to the south were dissolving into the blue light. Only the thin river held a trickle of sun. Now the sky to the west deepened to indigo, a color never seen. A dark sky usually loses color. This was a saturated, deep indigo, up in the air. Stuck up into that unworldly sky, was the cone of Mount Adams, and the alpine glow was upon it. The alpenglow is that red light of sunset which holds out on snowy mountain tops long after the valleys and tablelands are dimmed. Look at Mount Adams, I said, and that was the last sane moment I remember. I turned back to the sun. It was going. The sun was going, and the world was wrong. The grasses were wrong. They were platinum. Their every detail of stem, head, and blade shone lightless and artificially distinct as an art photographer's platinum print. This color had never been seen on Earth. The hues were metallic. Their finish was matte. The hillside was a 19th century tinted photograph from which the tints had faded. All the people you see in the photograph, distinct and detailed as their faces look, are now dead. The sky was navy blue. My hands were silver. All the distant hills as grass were fine-spun metal which the wind laid down. I was watching a faded color print of a movie filmed in the Middle Ages. I was standing in it by some mistake. I was standing in a movie of hillside grasses filmed in the Middle Ages. I missed my own century, the people I knew, and the real light of day. I looked at Gary. He was in the film. Everything was lost. He was a platinum print, a dead artist's vision or version of life. I saw in his skull the darkness of night mixed with the colors of day. My mind was going out. My eyes were receding the way galaxies recede into the rim of space. Gary was light years away, gesturing inside a circle of darkness, down the wrong end of a telescope. He smiled as if he saw me. The stringy crinkles around his eyes moved. The sight of him, familiar and wrong, was something I was remembering from centuries hence, from the other side of death. Yes, that is the way he used to look when we were living, when it was our generation's turn to be alive. I could not hear him. The wind was too loud. Behind him, the sun was going. We had all started down a chute of time. At first it was pleasant. Now there was no stopping it. Gary was shooting away across space, moving and talking and catching my eye, shooting down the long corridor of separation. The skin on his face moved like thin bronze plating that would peel. The grass at our feet was wild barley. It was the wild einkorn wheat which grew on the hilly flanks of Zagros Mountains, above the Euphrates Valley, above the valley of the river we called River. We harvested the grass with stone sickles, I remember. We found the grasses on the hillsides. We built our shelter beside them and cut them down. This is how we used to look then, that one moving and living and catching my eye, with the sky so dark behind him and the wind blowing. God save our life. From all the hills came screams. A piece of sky behind the crescent sun was detaching. It was a loosened circle of evening sky, suddenly lighted from the back. It was an abrupt black body out of nowhere. It was a flat disk. It was almost over the sun. That is when there were screams. At once this disk of sky slid over the sun like a lid. The sky snapped over the sun like a lens cover. The hatch in the brain slammed. Abruptly it was dark night on the land and in the sky. In the night sky was a tiny ring of light. The hole where the sun belongs is very small. A thin ring of light marked its place. There was no sound. The eyes dried. The arteries drained. The lungs hushed. There was no world. We were the world's dead people rotating and orbiting around and around, embedded in the planet's crust while the earth rolled down. Our minds were light years distant, forgetful of almost everything. Only an extraordinary act of will could recall to us our former living selves and our context in matter and time. We had, it seems, loved the planet and loved our lives, but could no longer remember the way of them. We got the light wrong. In the sky was something that could not be there, and the black sky was a ring of light. It was a thin ring, an old, thin silver wedding band, an old, worn ring. It was an old wedding band in the sky, or a morsel of bone. There were stars. It was all over. It is now that the temptation is strongest to leave these regions. We have seen enough. Let's go. Why burn our hands any more than we have to? But 2 years have passed. The price of gold has risen. I returned to the same buried alluvial beds and picked through the strata again. I saw, early in the morning, the sun diminish against a backdrop of sky. I saw a circular piece of that sky appear, suddenly detached, blackened, and backlighted. From nowhere it came and overlapped the sun. It did not look like the moon. It was enormous and black. If I had not read that it was the moon, I could have seen the sight 100 times and never thought it was the moon once. If, however, I had not read that it was the moon, if, like most of the world's people throughout time, I had simply glanced up and seen this thing, then I doubtless would not have speculated much, but would have, like Emperor Louis of Bavaria in 1840, simply died of fright on the spot. It did not look like a dragon, although it looked more like a dragon than the moon. It looked like a lens cover, or the lid of a pot. It materialized out of thin air, black and flat and sliding, outlined in flame. Seeing this black body was like seeing a mushroom cloud. The heart screeched. The meaning of the sight overwhelmed its fascination. It obliterated meaning itself. If you were to glance out one day and see a row of mushroom clouds rising on the horizon, you would know at once that what you were seeing, remarkable as it was intrinsically not worth remarking. No use running to tell anyone. Significant as it was, it did not matter a whit. For what is significance? It is significance for people. No people, no significance. This is all I have to tell you. In the deeps are the violence and terror of which psychology has warned us. But if you ride these monsters deeper down, if you drop with them farther over the world's rim, you find what our sciences cannot locate or name: the substrate, the ocean or matrix or ether which buoys the rest, which gives goodness its power for good and evil, its power for evil, the unified field, our complex and inexplicable caring for each other and for our life together here. This is given. It is not learned. The world which lay under darkness and stillness following the closing of the lid was not the world we knew. The event was over. Its devastation lay around us, the clamoring mind and heart stilled, almost indifferent, certainly disembodied, frail and exhausted. The hills were hushed, obliterated. Up in the sky, like a crater for some distant cataclysm, was a hollow ring. You have seen photographs of the sun taken during a total eclipse. The corona fills the print. All of those photographs were taken through telescopes. The lenses of telescopes and cameras can no more cover the breadth and scale of the visual array than language can cover the breadth and simultaneity of internal experience. Lenses enlarge the sight, omit its context, and make of it a pretty and sensible picture, like something on a Christmas card. I assure you, if you send any shepherds a Christmas card on which is printed a 3x3 photograph of the angel of the Lord, the glory of the Lord, and a multitude of the heavenly hosts, they will not be sore afraid. More fearsome things can come in envelopes. More moving photographs than those of the sun's corona can appear in magazines. But I pray you will never see anything more awful in the sky. You see the wide world swaddled in darkness. You see a vast breadth of hilly land and an enormous distant blackened valley. You see town's lights, a river's path, and blurred portions of your hat and scarf. You see your husband's face looking like an early black and white film. You see a sprawl of black sky and blue sky together, with unfamiliar stars in it, some barely visible bands of clouds, and over there a small white ring. The ring is as small as one goose in a flock of migrating geese. If you happen to notice a flock of migrating geese, it is 1/360th part of the visible sky. The sun we see is less than half of the diameter of a dime held at arm's length. The Crab Nebula in the constellation Taurus looks, through binoculars, like a smoke ring. It is a star in the process of exploding. Light from its explosion first reached the Earth in 1054. It was a supernova then, and so bright it shone in the daytime. Now it is not so bright, but it is still exploding. It expands at the rate of 70 million miles a day. It is interesting to look through binoculars at something expanding 70 million miles a day. It does not budge. Its apparent size does not increase. Photographs of the Crab Nebula taken 15 years ago seem identical to photographs of it taken yesterday. Some lichens are similar. Botanists have measured some ordinary lichens twice at 50-year intervals without detecting any growth at all. And yet their cells divide. They live. A small ring of light was like these things, like a ridiculous lichen up in the sky, like a perfectly still explosion 4,200 light years away. It was interesting, and lovely, and a witless motion, and it had nothing to do with anything. It had nothing to do with anything. The sun was too small, and too cold, and too far away to keep the world alive. The white ring was not enough. It was feeble and worthless. It was as useless as a memory. It was as off-kilter and hollow and wretched as a memory. When you try your hardest to recall someone's face, or the look of a place, you see in your mind's eye some vague and terrible sight such as this. It is dark. It is insubstantial. It is all wrong. The white ring and the saturated darkness made the earth and the sky look as they must look in the memories of the careless dead. What I saw, what I seemed to be standing in, was all the wrecked light that the memories of the dead could shed upon the living world. We had all died in our boots on the hilltops of Yakima, and were alone in eternity. Empty space stopped our eyes and mouths. We cared for nothing. We remembered our living days wrong. With great effort we had remembered some sort of circular light in the sky, but only the outline. Oh, and then the orchard trees withered, the ground froze, the glaciers slid down the valleys and overlapped the towns. If there had ever been people on earth, nobody knew it. The dead had forgotten those they loved. The dead were parted one from the other, and could no longer remember the faces and lands they had loved in the light. They seemed to stand on darkened hilltops, looking down. We teach our children one thing only, as we were taught, to wake up. We teach our children to look alive there, to join by words and activities the life of human culture on the planet's crust. As adults, we are almost all adept at waking up. We have so mastered the transition, we have forgotten we have ever learned it. Yet it is a transition we make 100 times a day, as, like so many will-less dolphins, we plunge and surface, lapse and emerge. We live half our waking lives and half all of our sleeping lives in some private, useless, insensible waters we never mention or recall. Useless, I say, valueless, I might add, until someone hauls their wealth up to the surface and into the wide-awake city in a form that people can use. I do not know how we got to the restaurant. Like Rothke, I take my walking slow. I take my waking slow. Gradually I seemed more or less alive, and already forgetful. It was now almost 9 in the morning. It was the day of a solar eclipse in central Washington, and a fine adventure for everyone. The sky was clear. There was a fresh breeze out of the north. The restaurant was a roadside place with tables and booths. The other eclipse watchers were there. From our booth we could see their cars, California license plates, their University of Washington parking stickers. Inside the restaurant, we were all eating eggs or waffles. People were fairly shouting and exchanging exchanging enthusiasms like fans after a World Series game. Did you see? Did you see? And somebody said something which knocked me for a loop. College student, a boy in a blue parka who carried a Hasselblad, said to us, "Did you see that little white ring? It looked like a lifesaver. It looked like a lifesaver up in the sky." And so it did. The boy spoke well. He was a walking alarm clock. I myself had at that time no access to such a word. He could write a sentence and I could not. I grabbed that lifesaver and wrote it to the surface. And I had to laugh. I had been dumbstruck on the Euphrates River. I had been dead and gone and grieving, all over the sight of something which, if you could claw your way up to that level, you would grant looked very much like a lifesaver. It was good to be back among people so clever. It was good to have all the world's words at the mind's disposal, so the mind could begin its tasks. All those things for which we have no words are lost. The mind, the culture, has 2 little tools, grammar and lexicon, a decorated sand bucket and a matching shovel. With these, we bluster about the continent and do all the world's work. With these, we try to save our very lives. There are a few more things to tell from this level, the level of the restaurant. One is the old joke about breakfast. It can never be satisfied, the mind, never. Wallace Stevens wrote that, and in the long run he was right. The mind wants to live forever, or to learn a very good reason why not. The mind wants the world to return its love, or its awareness. The mind wants to know all the world, and all eternity, and God. The mind psychic, however, will settle for 2 eggs over easy. The dear, stupid body was as easily satisfied as a spaniel, and, incredibly, the simple spaniel can lure the brawling mind to its dish. It is everlastingly funny that the proud, metaphysically ambitious, clamoring mind will hush if you give it an egg. Further, while the mind reels in deep space, while the mind grieves or fears or exults, the workaday senses, at anchor in its idiocy, like so many computer terminals printing out market prices while the world blows up, still transcribe their little data and transmit them to the warehouse in the skull. Later, under the tranquilizing influence of fried eggs, the mind can sort through this data. The restaurant was a halfway house, a decompression chamber. There I remembered a few things more. The deepest and most terrifying was this. I have said that I heard screams. I have since read that screaming with hysteria is a common reaction even to expected total eclipses. People on all the hillsides, including, I think, myself, screamed when the black body of the moon detached from the sky and rolled over the sun. But something else was happening at that same instant, and it was this, I believe, which made us scream. The second before the sun went out, we saw a wall of dark shadow come speeding at us. We no sooner saw it than it was upon us, like thunder. It roared up the valley. It slammed our hill and knocked us out. It was the monstrous swift shadow cone of the moon. I have since read that this wave of shadow moves at 1,800 miles an hour. Language can give no sense of this sort of speed. 1,800 miles an hour. It was 195 miles wide. No end was in sight. You saw only the edge. It rolled at you across the land at 1,800 miles an hour, hauling darkness like plague behind it. Seeing it, and knowing it was coming straight for you, was like feeling a slug of anesthetic shoot up your arm. If you think very fast, you may have time to think. Soon it will hit my brain. You can feel the deadness race up your arm. You can feel the appalling, inhuman speed of your own blood. We saw the wall of shadow coming and screamed before it hit. This was the universe about which we had read so much and never before felt. The universe as a clockwork of loose spheres flung at stupefying, unauthorized speeds. How could anything move so fast, not crash, not veer from its orbit amuck like a car out of control on a turn? Less than 2 minutes later, when the sun emerged, the trailing edge of the shadow cone sped away. I coursed down our hill and raced eastward over the plain, faster than the eye could believe. It swept over the plain and dropped over the planet's rim, and in twinkling it had clobbered us, and now it roared away. We blinked in the light. It was as though an enormous loping god in the sky had reached down and slapped the earth's face. Something else, something more ordinary, came back to me about the third cup of coffee. During the moments of totality, it was so dark that the drivers on the highway below turned on their cars' headlights. We could see the highway's route as a strand of lights. It was bumper to bumper down there. It was 8:15 in the morning, Monday morning, and the people were driving into Yakima to work. That it was as dark as night, as eerie as hell, an hour after dawn, apparently meant that in order to drive to work, people had to use their headlights. 4 or 5 cars pulled off the road. The rest, in a line of at least 5 miles long, drove to town. The highway ran between hills. The people could not have seen any of the eclipsed sun at all. Yakima would have another total eclipse in 2086. Perhaps, in 2086, businesses will give their employees an hour off. From the restaurant, we drove back to the coast. The highway crossing the Cascades Range was open. We drove over the mountain like old pros. We joined our places on the planet's thin crust. It held. For the time being, we were home free. Early that morning at 6, when we had checked out, the 6 bald men were sitting on folding chairs in the dim hotel lobby. The television was on. Most of them were awake. You might drown in your own spittle, God knows, at any time. You might wake up dead in a small hotel, a cabbage head watching TV while snow piles up in the passes, watching TV while the chili peppers smile and the moon passes over the sun, and nothing changes and nothing is learned because you have lost your bucket and shovel and no longer care. What if you regain the surface and open your sack and find, instead of a treasure, a beast which jumps at you? Or you may not come back at all. The winches may jam, the scaffolding buckle, the air conditioning collapse. You may glance up one day and see by your headline the canary keeled over in its cage. You may reach into a cranny for pearls and touch a moray eel. You yank on your rope. It is too late. Apparently, people share a sense of these hazards, for when the total eclipse ended, an odd thing happened. When the sun appeared as a blinding bead on the ring's side, the eclipse was over. The black lens cover appeared again, backlighted, and slid away. At once the yellow light made the sky blue again. The black lid dissolved and vanished away. The real world began there. I remember now. We all hurried away. We were born and bored at a stroke. We rushed down the hill. We found our car. We saw the other people streaming down the hillsides. We joined the highway traffic and drove away. We never looked back. It was a general vamoose, and an odd one, for when we left the hill, the sun was still partially eclipsed. A sight rare enough, and and one which, in itself, we would probably have driven 5 hours to see. But enough is enough. One turns at last even from glory itself from a sigh of relief. From the depths of mystery, and even from the heights of splendor, we bounce back and hurry for the latitudes of home. So that's Total Eclipse by Ann Dillard. Apparently that's nonfiction. It's kind of intense for nonfiction, though. Yeah, this is going to make me sound like a real nerd. It reminds me of Dark Souls, like the imagery. And in fact, it reminds me of a poem that I read, or that my brother sent me, which I think we have time for before I get off the computer. Maybe next time we'll read that short story, but that other one. I kind of like that story. I felt like it dragged on a little bit at some points. Um, Let me see if I can find this before it. Assuming I stop getting distracted eventually. So what did you guys think of that poem anyway? You can be honest. I'll be nice. Maybe. Okay, well, that's a complete lie. Oh. But anyways, my brother sent me a link to this poem because it seems like a very obvious influence for Bloodborne, the video game. So we're gonna check this out. I know Tyler's played a little bit of Bloodborne. I will sure be able to appreciate it. Maybe I can upload it and some nerds will appreciate it. But we'll read that real quick and then we'll log off for the night. Oh, whoops, actually. Okay. Darkness by Lord Byron. I had a dream, which was not all a dream. The bright sun was extinguished, and the stars did wander darkling in the eternal space. Rayless and pathless, and the icy earth swung blind and blackening in the moonless air. Morn came and went, and came, and brought no day, and men forgot their passions in the dread of this their desolation, and all hearts were chilled into a selfish prayer for light. And they did live by watchfires, and the thrones, the palaces of crowned kings, the huts, the habitations of all things which dwell, were burned for beacons, cities were consumed, and men were gathered round their blazing homes, to look once more into each other's face. Happy were those who dwelt within the eye of the volcanoes and their mountain torch. A fearful hope was all the world contained. Forests were set on fire, but hour by hour they fell and faded, and the crackling trunks extinguished with a crash, and all was black. The brows of men by the despairing light wore an unearthly aspect as by fits. The flashes fell upon them, some lay down and hid their eyes and wept, and some did rest their chins upon their clenched hands and smiled, and others hurried to and fro and fed their funeral piles with fuel, and looked up with mad disquietude on the dull sky, the pall of the past world, and then again with curses cast them down upon the dust, and gnashed their teeth and howled, the wild birds shrieked, and terrified did flutter on the ground, and flap their useless wings. The wildest brutes came tame and tremulous, and vipers crawled, and twinned themselves among the multitude. Hissing, but stingless, they were slain for food. And war, which for a moment was no more, did glut himself again. A meal was bought, with blood, and each sate sullenly apart, gorging himself in gloom. No love was left. All earth was but one thought, and that was death, immediate and inglorious, and the pang of famine fed upon all entrails. Men died, and their bones were tombless as their flesh. The meagre by the meagre were devoured. Even dogs assailed their masters, all save one, and he was faithful to a cause, and kept the birds and beasts and famished men at bay, till hunger clung them, while the drooping dead lured their lank jaws. Himself sought out no food, but with a piteous and perpetual moan, and a quick desolate cry, licking the hand, which answered not with a caress, he died. The crowd was famished by degrees, but two of an enormous city did survive, and they were enemies. They met beside the dying embers of an altar place, where had been heaped a mass of holy things. For an unholy sage they racked up, and shivered scrapped with their cold skeleton hands. The feeble ashes in their feeble breath blew for a little life and made a flame, which was a mockery. Then they lifted up their eyes as it grew lighter, and beheld each other's aspects, saw and shrieked and died. Even of their mutual hideousness they died, unknowing who he was upon whose brow famine had written fiend. The world was void. Populous and the powerful was a lump, seasonless, herbless, treeless, manless, lifeless. A lump of death, a chaos of hard clay. The rivers, lakes, and ocean all stood still, and nothing stirred within their silent depths. Ships, sailorless, lay rotting on the sea, and their masts fell down piecemeal, and they dropped. They slept on the abyss without a surge. The waves were dead, and the tides were in their grave. The moon, their mistress, had expired before. The winds were withered in the stagnant air, and the clouds perished. Darkness had no need of aid from them. She was the universe. And then they all lived happily ever after. Okay, that's about enough for tonight. Oh, wait, actually, before I do that, what was her name? Annie Dillard. And then Darkness by Lord Byron. But anyways, Darkness, the Eclipse reminded me of Darkness. But thanks you all for joining me and listening to me ramble about Darkness and fun stuff. But y'all have a good night. Have a good week. Take care of yourself. You know, I'm not in any position to be giving people life advice. Anything I give you, probably a bad idea. Just go to bed. That's the best advice I can give you. Good night.